Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after this meeting. We've had apologies from Mrs. Fryer and Mr. Hills. Mr. Hill is acting as a substitute. So we move on to the first item, which is the minutes from the last meeting held on the 15th of March 2023. I move these are taken as read, confirmed as signed. Is everyone in agreement?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. So item 2 is question time. I've not received any questions from the public. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare on items on the agenda? No. Okay. So item 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I have not received any petitions. So that moves us on to item 8, the first substantive item of today's meeting, which is the Youth Justice Plan 2023 to 2026. This starts on page 13 of your agenda pack. Sharon Cook, who is Assistant of Children and Family Services, introducing the item and is being supported by Carly Turner, Service Manager in the Children and Families Wellbeing Service. We're also joined by Mrs. Taylor, the lead member for Children and Family Services. So welcome, everyone. And if we start, Sharon, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. We're here to present to the Scrutiny Commission the draft Youth Justice Strategic Plan for 23-26. The report before you actually outlines the statutory requirements and responsibilities under the Crime and Disorder Act that require us to prepare a youth justice plan, which is linked to then releasing the youth justice grant money. So the bottom of the page 13 under section 4 gives you some of the background of the development of such plans by the Youth Justice Service that was formerly the Youth Offending Teams, and then the report over at paragraph 5 to 7 gives some of the outline of the data, the performance data and other things that are taken into account in producing the plan. I'm going to hand over to Carly Turner, who is the Service Manager and Youth Offending Lead Officer, that will take you through the draft plan that's attached as an addendum to the report, and we'd be happy then to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Morning all. I'm just going to pull some of the salient points. I'm aware it's a really lengthy plan that has been submitted and it follows the requirements of the Youth Justice Board. So I'll pull out the key achievements, where we're going forward and any of the bits that we need to from there. So paragraph 14 and 15, as Sharon's mentioned, talk about the resource implications. So that's really about the financial part of it. But one thing I think it's really important to share is the partnership contributions in staffing in kind that aren't represented in the report but are in the plan. So I just wanted to share with the committee that we have, through our own public health here at Leicestershire County Council, we've now got a public health lead for youth justice, which is really incredible because we know there's lots of injustices around health there. So we've got someone full-time. We've got access to, we've got co-located with us 2 full-time warranted police officers, a full-time probation officer. We've got a CAMS community psychiatric nurse and full access to an expedited CAMS pathway and access to an adverse childhood experience team. So we're really rich in our support from the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. And I think it's really important to share that with you, because obviously you'll see themes throughout the plan of where we've worked towards a health pathway and how we're on a really good journey with that. We are commissioned to deliver statutory youth and justice work on behalf of Rutland County Council as well, so that's why the plan represents Rutland County Council within there. So the plan really is grounded in the vision of the Children and Families Service and Leicestershire County Council's strategic objectives around improved outcomes being clean and green, and we really embody all of that within the plan. In terms of last year's progress against the 3-year plan, we spent a significant period of time in the new service following an early help transformation, where we amalgamated what was the old youth offending service and the youth work offer in supporting Leicestershire families, and we really developed our practice and our culture as well, and we're really proud of that. Our performance throughout that period has remained really high. We've got a strong prevention offer, so not only in the Youth and Justice Service, but across Leicestershire County Council, there's a real commitment to that. And that, I believe, supports the performance that we see within youth justice. We've got credible alternatives to children going into custody, and we've got really strong partnership working. We've developed our child first approach, and I think it's really important that that we acknowledge that children that are propelled into youth justice can often be seen as making adult decisions in an adult world and making their own judgments, where actually what we know is there's a lot of neurodiversity issues within there, where actually the mind and the brain hasn't formed, and actually they're not making those decisions in the best well-informed way. So that's why we've got a lot of emphasis on health. So really the purpose of our child first approach is about tapping into skills and hobbies and really creating new experiences for children. So diverting them away from friendship groups, introducing them into gym sessions, into sport works really well for our cohort. We're incredibly proud of our collaboration with children as well. You'll see in section 3 of the plan, so page 24 onwards of the pack, that we really have celebrated having a young adult come to our Youth and Justice Management Board to really share honestly his experiences around all of his involvement with all of those agencies. So what it felt like to transition into probation and to move along a number of different hostels, what it felt like to be dealt with by the police when you haven't got your belongings back. And that really came to show some good outcomes for that young adult and for us to learn within the partnership. And then you'll see on page 26 that we have really celebrated having young volunteers as part of the service, and that they are incredibly skilled, and they interview all of our potential recruits across the service, and they write their own activities, their own tasks, and they contribute 50% to the recruitment score overall. And they're really hard group of people to get to be interviewed by. So we're incredibly proud of that. The feedback that they give to candidates, they really respect that as well. And over the last 3 years, we've been really committed, as I've mentioned, to our health pathways, because we know those inequalities exist. What we do know about our children, I think it's really important to share this, is that those entering the criminal justice system are appearing later in their childhood. So we've got a higher proportion, over 50% of our current caseload of children are 17 to 18-year-olds, where before it was slightly younger, so there were 13 and 14-year-olds. And whilst that's really positive that is at younger children, it poses a challenge around the complexities of those children that we're working with that are 17. So a large number of those won't be receiving any educational input or training or employment. In fact, they probably look quite unmotivated to do that. And when you dig deeper under the surface, what you really realise is we've got groups of children that are compounded by trauma. They've got really complicated family relationships. They've had poor experiences at school, so that they may have been supported really well in primary school, or they may have not. They've transitioned into secondary, and that's become really challenging. And then a number of those children have been excluded or are in alternative provisions on really low numbers of hours of provision. We know we've got children that have got unmet needs around health and education, and we know that over 85% of our children struggle to communicate effectively. So what we're actually dealing with are really vulnerable children that are displaying criminal behaviour. So that's the challenge really for the next 3 years, is how we unpick that, how we work together in partnership through the board, as partners and as a service, to support our children to find stability, to form roots and a sense of identity and belonging. And it's a challenge. And so the next 3 years of the plan really are helping us to unpick and deliver on the new key performance indicators from the Youth Justice Board. They're in section 7 of the plan, page 16, and they're to help us really understand the need. So what proportion of children are struggling to find accommodation, what proportion of children are struggling to be in education, and where we can celebrate the achievements of moving those percentages through. We've got priorities around health. I've mentioned that a couple of times, but we're really focused at the moment. We are undertaking a health needs analysis with our public health colleagues, and we've got some registrar time. We've completed phase 1 of that, which is our children responding to, it's quite lengthy, and they gave us that brutal feedback that it was too lengthy for them, but a questionnaire to help us unpick what's going on for them. So what do they understand about relationships? What do they understand about smoking? What does vaping mean to them? So that actually we can shape our commission services going forward. We're also developing a proposal for speech and language therapy based on the issues that we know around communication, and they're not just specific to Leicestershire, they're nationwide as well. So we're working on some evidence-based programmes, so with the Youth Endowment Fund around the REACH project, and something called Turnaround, which is really targeting groups of children that need specific intervention, and we've got research partners on board to help us through the Violence Reduction Network deliver on that. And we're looking at delivering on our serious violence duty, which we're in a strong place to deliver because we've got a strong partnership basis. The big challenge really is how we manage risk that some of those children pose. So we talk about serious violence and managing that against the vulnerabilities of the child first approach, and how we work in partnership to do that, particularly with the Child Exploitation Hub. And one of my final points really is the committee will see that there's a key area on overrepresented children that are part of the youth justice cohort. That's the cohort across England and Wales, and for Leicestershire it's predominantly around Black and mixed heritage boys and girls. So we know girls are propelled into court outcomes much faster than white boys would be, and we're working really hard to unpick that. So we've got a working group around girls, and we're looking at doing some partnership quality assurance work to track back and understand the experiences of our Black and mixed heritage boys, so that we can start to look at some systems leadership about how we change those moving forward. So just to conclude, there's an action plan around our work on overrepresentation on page 49 of the pack, and there's an action plan on page 45 and 46 which looks at our current year of practice development. And that's the general overview from the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carly, for a very good run through of the report there. Mrs. Taylor, did you wish to make a comment at this stage before I open up to the other councillors?
No, nothing at this stage, Chair. We're happy to take some questions.
Right, so over to the panel. Do members have any questions, comments on the report? Mrs. Hack.
Thank you. The strategy is really useful to have an overview. It'd be great to understand how it works in practice. So, you know, particular my division, we've had some real issues with young people, starting to create a lot of problems around our community buildings. And it's been very much a police-led response so far. So how does it work through when we see pockets of problems that may well appear? What's the response to that, and how do we allocate workers? Is it a flexible team? Do we actually look at youth services trying to deal with the particular issue, and then when it dies down, move on? How does it work in practice?
Thank you, Mrs. Hack. I think we've got quite a varied response really to those community-based issues. So we work in partnership with the police, so we are members of every joint action group across every district and including Rutland. So we do offer information and we do take referrals for children, and we do look at how we can respond as a partnership as part of those joint action groups. And obviously each JAG looks different in each district. We have the ability to deploy street-based youth workers to hotspot areas of antisocial behaviour, and they're out and about at the moment across different areas, and that's a referral mechanism that's driven by the antisocial behaviour teams in district councils and through the police, and we work really closely. We've also got a violence, through the Violence Reduction Network, hotspot data on where we should target as to where offences have been committed. So we can move those teams really agile. We get lots of information in and we have information out, but I guess some of it is resource led. So we've got a prevention team that will take referrals for those children that are on the cusp of offending. We have youth workers that are able to take more generic work for perhaps children that are just on the real periphery of that antisocial behaviour. And then we're looking at being really innovative. So the Youth Endowment Fund projects that we're talking about, they give us additional resource to address those. So the REACH project is working for youth workers across 4 schools in Charnwood and Northwest Leicestershire at looking at the value of having youth workers within a school setting, and that's showing real promise at the moment, and that's being evaluated by Sheffield Hallam University. So I guess the struggle is in the community, you don't, perhaps members of the public and partners don't see things moving as fast as they potentially would want them to do, but when we're dealing with the complexity of the nature of what's going on for children, what we know is trusted relationships and having people there and available to them does show some fruition, but it doesn't give an immediate response. So I guess the response would look very much policing in terms of dispersal, but then we are working in the background at looking at where there's additional family support needed, perhaps where some of those children are involved with the child exploitation hub. So we've got a good grip of those children. The other complicating factor is that when we do any prevention work, there's got to be consent there, and actually we'll go out and we'll be really quite considered, and we'll go out to families and to children, but actually if they say no to us, it becomes a struggle, and we do see a proportion of children and families that don't want that prevention offer. So it's quite a varied and agile response as to how we can do that.
Yeah, I mean that's really useful. I'm interested in the word used, prevention, because actually we're targeting where there's an issue. So what prevention do we actually do? Because at the moment it feels responsive, and clearly historically we would have had a much larger youth team that would have, when we done youth stuff in local communities, regardless of whether there was crime with young people or not. So what do we do to, prevention is an interesting one, because it's not really prevention, it's actually dealing with it once we know it's there. How do we best use our resources? Because I'm still not sure whether or not the spikes that we're receiving in my division have had what kind of response they've had. So maybe we have a conversation afterwards. The other question is, how do we link with our colleagues in the city? So the secondary school in my division is 50-50. Between city kids and county kids, which means that children are moving across the boundary. The boundary is arbitrary to them, of course. So how are we working with our colleagues across the city where we've got these crossover points? Because it won't just be my division, it'll be lots of our divisions.
I'm happy to take that conversation to look at specifically at your area and what's going on. I guess there is the challenge around resource, and we've got to be really honest about that. We don't have an infinite resource, and we have to target where we can do. But we are looking at we work with our voluntary and community sector, so Young Leicestershire and other provision to be able to divert, but that isn't necessarily the strong offer in perhaps some of the places that you would want to be. And I know some of our district councils have been successful in pots of money to be able to deal with children as well, and adults that oppose antisocial behaviour through safer streets funding. So, but I'm happy to take that conversation outside. In terms of the city, we've got really robust relationships with the city, so we particularly through youth justice and through our police officers, we meet monthly. We've got all of the profiles of the children that live and travel across those boundaries. We map what's going on with those children. We work in collaboration, so I feel really confident that cross-boundary. You're absolutely right. Children, adults, they don't see boundaries as we see them. And it's important that we have those relationships with the city. We're embedded fully in the Child Exploitation Hub, which is a Leicestershire and Rutland initiative. So we're in all of the right partnerships. We've got the right operational and strategic relationships to be able to work with those cross-boundary issues and children that travel across them.
I think just to add to that prevention stuff as well, we're not just working with the perpetrator, it's looking at their whole family network. So you tend to get generations of families, brothers, sisters following the older one. So the work we do now is with whole families and contextually across their neighbourhoods, friendship groups, that sort of stuff. So there might be one perpetrator, but we've probably prevented another 5 that actually joining in with them. So that prevention is happening sort of in the background. So, you know, just that we don't just deal with that one person.
Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I've never seen this put on paper in the way that you've done it, and in terms of resources that we actually do mobilise, I'm staggered at the amount that we do put in. My question really is about a parent struggling, and you mentioned particularly North West, and which I'm slightly familiar with, that schools-wise, we were beginning to put people into schools, workers into schools, so that they could actually pinpoint and maybe help with the referral. So do I understand then that as a parent, if at a parents' evening, if I wander in there and I have my son or daughter that's giving me cause for concern, there is a pathway that now within this system, and it's an excellent prevent pathway in that sense, because rather like Mrs. Hack seemed to allude to, I think that some parents may very well know that they have a problem individual that they're struggling with and may seek help, and the teachers are probably the first people they see. So could you just outline how that is going to work, or how that's worked or is working so far for us? Because I think that's an excellent parent approach.
Okay, so back in 2019 we took a different approach. So we've now got one singular referral mechanism into the whole department through into early help and children's social care through the multi-agency referral form. And so that's triage, but it's looked at in a whole family context. So we don't have police officers that are specifically referring for a child. Actually, you know, there's various checkpoints and conversations that are held to look at with the family at what the right approach is for that family. So I think that's a real strong offer, and it's triaged through a safeguarding lens as well, and then comes up to us in early help, and then it is sent out into localities where we look differently. So each area has different resources. So can we, you know, do we need to keep a child and their family into a county council service when actually there might be something in the community that's really strong and offers them a longer support period and gets them to form relationships in the community? So we look really creatively at those families and those children, but definitely since the early help transformation and being part of children's social care as well, that we've been able to really consolidate and build on the strength of that referral process. Schools are our highest referral, because obviously referrals, they see children for a number significant period of time, and they're also not seeing the children that they should be seeing, so they're referring those children through to us. So we are building those relationships up with schools. We've got a new teen health service that's part of the children and family wellbeing service that are now going out into schools to be providing that contact. And we know from our own youth endowment fund project, the REACH project, that schools are really good at sharing information when we've got a youth worker in there. So we're wanting to learn from that approach moving forward. I've also been contacted by a number of multi-academy trusts that are interested in developing their own alternative provision as well, and want conversations about how youth justice and prevention work can be looked at within that context as well, which I think is a really positive place to be with schools.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. That's a really comprehensive report and comprehensive explanations. Now, I've got 2 points. One, which follows on those both. If I'm a parent, how do I know what's available to me? How do I know what the process is? Does it change every time, or is there a set process? Now, this was my note earlier on, if I'm looking at page 28, there is a delivery model, and you also talk about strong partnerships. So do all the partners know what they are doing? How do we ensure good communication? And how do we ensure that the process isn't repeated and resources are being wasted somewhere along the line? So that's number one. And number two, on page 24, we're talking about C, who receives secure housing. Yeah, so so there's a nice little picture of somebody who talked to the district council, and so within the national picture now, we're all geared to build houses, but some child like this would like a 1-bedroom apartment, and we're struggling for older people, for single people, and accommodation. So I think district councils and local plans and government needs to be aware that we need more secure accommodation. So how do you work with the partners to ensure that this is taken on board when they're doing local plans, and how can you ensure that there is an emphasis to get that, or enough secured housing that is sustainable in the long term? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. So in terms of the first question, we've worked really hard to promote our services and to make our self-serve on the web, on the LCC website, really quite easy for families to navigate. So families can self-refer on the multi-agency referral form. It's actually more helpful when families refer, because we know that, that they're much more honest in terms of what goes into that referral form. So we've got a big exposure on the LCC website. We do a lot of work around in districts through partnerships, through particularly like SEND. We go and do some SEND workshops where parents come along. We've got a visible Facebook groups in each of the district and boroughs where we're sharing what's going on and how people can refer to our service, and we do have access where people can message us and we can divert. We also do have a early helpline as well, where parents can ring. So if they're struggling to fill out the referral form, they can have a conversation about how to do that. So I feel confident that we've got all of that in place, and we've spent a lot of time getting the website up to a point where it's actually quite easy for families to navigate under particular headings. So if you've got a child that you're worried about that might be offending, it tells you all of the support there. If you've got a child that is a young carer, it talks about all of the support there. And obviously children don't fit neatly in those boxes, do they? So we've got young carers that then go on to offend, that have got early help care plans. So we will help children navigate those. So I've spoken quite a lot about partnership working, but that's how we work the best with families, and we're really committed to doing that. So sharing the information, really making sure that we're not duplicating that resource, and that people that children and families that work with us are clear on what the plan is and who's going to deliver that. Sometimes though there are multiple people in there that have got statutory responsibility. So you might have a youth justice officer that's got a criminal aspect, you might have a social worker that's looking at it from a safeguarding aspect, and you might have police that are looking at it from a criminal aspect as well. And we meet to look at what that plan should look like, who's the best person to deliver some of that intervention to the family. We've got within the service as well something called Project Responsive, which is 5 full-time youth workers that we just enable to go out and build really strong relationships with children, and actually mobilise a lot of the partnership working through those workers as well in terms of getting children and parents to appointments. So we're really committed to not duplicating, because we haven't got the resource to be able to do that, and to getting the best outcomes for those families through that partnership approach. All of those staff members that I spoke about from the partnership are here at in room 600 and are visible. So the warranted police officers that are there, our CAMS workers are there, turning point workers are there. And actually what we know works best is that people are having conversations with each other. So the youth justice is grounded in partnership work, and we do have strong evidence to suggest that that happens and that it has an impact as well. And then the second question, possibly on page 24, it should have said secured housing. So the lad in the picture, the child in the picture, C, he was in a very unsecure tenancy with the district council, and had been moved across a number of different probation hostels and then into temporary accommodation. And what happened is, because he came over into the Youth and Justice Management Board, it enabled us to have a district rep who specialises in housing to be there to give us that housing advice. So it wasn't about the lack of housing, it was about getting him secured housing, and part of that linked to the offending behaviour and the risks that were posed and the challenges around settling young adults into those communities. So sorry, it should have been secured housing.
On page 20, first paragraph, there's a typo that needs to be corrected.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to focus on a couple of questions about the challenges section on page 26. I think there's some really helpful information there. And you say that there's challenges with recruiting highly skilled staff and vacancies being held. I just wondered if that's what you meant, that we're holding vacancies rather than that you can't actually recruit because you can't get people. If you could just clarify the reason that those vacancies are being held.
Yeah, so
and then shall I do them all, or do you want to? Is that all right? And then yeah, worrying that the government's reviewing the formula for the Youth Justice Corps grant, because we know that we don't do very well in sharing out grant and funding in a range of LCC areas. So you flagged that up, and I think we need to keep an eye on that, Chair, because that could be another disaster if we lose more money. And then, very interesting one, the National Audit Office is predicting a doubling of the number of children in custody by 24. Could you explain why they think that is the case? And then obviously you're raising concerns about being compounded by the increase in children carrying knives. Could you just give a bit of information on how that, is that improving? Is it getting worse? And how we're hoping to address that. And then finally, later on you list all the people on the board. I noticed there's a vacancy from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. Not sure I'm too worried about that one. But generally there was a problem, I know what I wanted to ask, a problem a few years ago with non-attendance by some people. Obviously, everyone's busy, they're doing this as part of their day job, but it is important, looking down this list of all the partners that are on the board, from our own director downwards, that these people, I think there's 4 meetings a year, do attend. Do we keep a record of this, and how is it? How's it going? Is it improved? Thank you.
Thank you. So in relation to the first question and the vacancies, we have a mixture of vacancies that are held and ones where we're really struggling to recruit. So where they are vacancies that are funded through Youth Justice, we don't hold any of those vacancies. So we go out for recruitment, but there are some market issues at the moment. So not only for youth work, but social care and probation, and they are all the skills that you need to be a qualified youth justice officer. That's really compounding some of the issues at the moment. We've got 2 vacancies out for recruitment, and we're trying everything that we can, from drop-in sessions to rewriting job purposes to make it that make them look really attractive roles, which they are, and to really bring people in to apply for them. I think it's fair to say we get a high number of applicants, but then when you start to shortlist them, that they're in the lower end of single figures. So there's kind of two issues there. So we don't hold the youth justice vacancies, but we do hold the ones that are funded through the county council to contribute to the mid-term financial savings. So they will be the youth workers that do some of the prevention work, but we hold them to a natural point where it would take for vacancy control and recruitment, and then someone to give their notice in. So we're looking at a 3-month period, which is the natural point within there. In terms of the core grant, you're absolutely right. We don't know what that looks like. We've not had any indication other than the Ministry of Justice have held it off for another year because I think there's been some challenges in delivering it this year. I have shared some information back about things that they should consider, because as a county council, we do a lot of work where children come and live in care homes in Leicestershire, and we have to give the resource to those children as if they were our own children in Leicestershire. So I have fed that back because that's a significant proportion of work that doesn't, whilst those children don't contribute to any of our performance data, they certainly take up a large proportion of our capacity within the service. So I've fed that back through the Youth Justice Board.
These are private children's homes for 16. Yeah. There's been a lot of concern about these nationally, hasn't there? There's been, the BBC's done an inquiry into this and found some very, very worrying. And we've got a high proportion of those, have we, through you, Chair, in Leicestershire, of those sorts of accommodation?
We've got children that are in
out-county children that other authorities have placed
of their areas. Yeah.
And what's our role there then?
So within Youth Justice, we have to operate the court order as it's prescribed by the courts. If they're a child from another area and they have a high intensity court order, then we have to operate that court order as if we're their own youth justice area. So that's quite unique because we don't have to do that in other areas, but that's the statutory response. We'll obviously work in partnership with those areas and with the care homes as well. It's just that it takes up a good proportion of our resource to meet the needs. Some of those children can have 25 hours of intervention a week, and actually when you look at the resource that can take, it's worth being really honest and transparent to share that with the Ministry of Justice, because it isn't replicated in anything that we submit. So then there's one around the number of children in custody and the National Statistics Office. I know that's due to the rise of serious youth violence and the fact that it's becoming more difficult to for the custody threshold not to be met. So where there's knife crime, where there's serious incidents going on. So that's the national picture. In Leicestershire, we've got very low. The low end of we've probably got 3 children in custody at the moment, and that's the highest it's been for a number of years actually. So we're really strong in that, but it's worth knowing that the challenges are there. We have got a violence reduction network. We know that there's a serious violence issue that's going on in parts of the county. So that's why I've raised that as a challenge, because that's what the national statistics saying, and we're seeing a small growth with that. I guess that answers the next question around knives really. We know who our knife carriers are across the county. We share that information with the police, and we've got the cross-border information as well. So not only can we protect our staff that are going to meet with those children, we can do work with those children that are carrying knives, and we can reduce hopefully the impact of that within the communities through the partnership working. And then in terms of the board, with one of the new key performance indicators that came out, that started on the 1st of April, was exactly that around board attendance, because management boards have seen less and less attendance from statutory partners. So now we are reporting on that to the Youth Justice Board. It also forms part of the interest from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation. So they want to see the effectiveness of the board, and it can only be effective when people are attending, and if the core members can't attend, that the deputy that can attend is able to really accurately represent and make decisions. So we will have data. We do through the chair of the board, we do tackle that, and we've got good representation, but now it's a key performance indicator.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing that next year then, Chair, that data. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this, Carly. In my division, we've had a long-running issue at Lodge Farm, which is still carrying on. And I know, obviously, your teams have been deeply involved in that for a number of well over a year now, I think, that we've been trying to get the situation under control. And it's, I mean. I have to say, from a council perspective, to actually see the work that and the interagency teams that are actually involved in such a complex piece of work is quite extraordinary. I mean, the children involved are coming from all over the county. It's not just local children, but obviously the focus is very much on for the residents is very much sort of focused on them, and supporting them as victims is also been extraordinarily tough. The report, and obviously your work, is very much sort of focused on the children themselves, and it's children first is very much sort of built into the DNA of the approach. And the report obviously also makes a fair amount of reference to victims of crime and supporting victims of crime. I mean, it's sort of embedded, I guess, in the report rather than necessarily a sort of feature of it. And I just wonder whether there is an approach or a language that we can actually use, because certainly having sat on some of the interagency sort of meetings involving some residents as well, actually a lot of the discussion automatically goes straight to the sort of the core principles of supporting the youth, you know, the problems associated, etc., and actually the sort of victim voice of quite often ends up being almost an AOB at the end of the session or the meetings. And I just wonder whether there is an approach. I mean, clearly, you know, the report talks about the role of being able to rehabilitate and try and hopefully at the right appropriate moment to get children to actually understand the impact of what they've done to particularly the community or individual victims. But I wonder whether sometimes at sort of the interagency level that there needs to be slightly more awareness of the impact on victims, because I you know, the number of videos that I get sent of terrified residents from upstairs bedrooms, you know, filming police being attacked by children, is just extraordinary, and it's ongoing, and for those involved locally, never ending. Particularly when they're aware that obviously, you know, these are groups of children that are not local, they're not from their community. It's not as if they can relate directly to the individual family. So I don't know whether it's a contextual approach or whether it's actually just language, but maybe sometimes, you know, needs to be slightly up the agenda as to how we actually communicate, certainly at those sort of meetings.
Thank you. Lodge Farm has been a complex situation over the last year, isn't it? And we've been at those residents' meetings, and we've got good relationships with those residents. I've been out on patch walks in the early evening to find out what's going on, and we know that a lot of what is happening in the early hours, and actually residents are really fearful. There's definitely, we're part of the JAG response around that as well, but I think there's definitely something in the victim element of this where we could represent victims being communities, and I'm happy to take that away and talk about how we'll work with so we talk about individual victims where we've got a statutory responsibility, but I can absolutely build a paragraph in there about how we will respond to communities as victims as well.
Mr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. I can see the tremendous amount of work you're doing and how good and how you're trying to connect up with the children and everything else. You mentioned sometimes you need consent, you need cooperation from families. It strikes me that families who are not cooperating, it's almost, there's nothing you can do. They are then going to become, you know, the children are going to be become victims themselves because they're just going to develop. What sort of percentage of people actually reject offers of assistance?
I don't actually have the data for that. It's we would have it in specific projects. So we know for the REACH project, for example, which is the one where I've spoken about schools and identifying children that are at risk of exclusion, we've got a 96% engagement rate with that. It doesn't just, I guess, what I probably need to emphasise is just because someone doesn't consent to us doesn't mean that there aren't other services involved and that schools don't pay additional attention, or additional attention is given through district and borough council housing association. So the consent is to work with us. It doesn't mean that there's not other partners. And for some families, there's just too many people that are involved as well. So yeah, it doesn't mean that families are left drifting with nothing going on. We'll still track some of those families. We'll find out what's going on with them. Sometimes we'll take a really proactive approach. If we've had another bit of police evidence, we'll knock the door and say, are you sure you know, come and work with us? And the turnaround project that I've mentioned as well, that's given us a different opportunity. So we're focusing on children that are released under investigation on police bail, and we're getting a list of children's names from the police, and we're door knocking, and we're going to be really quite firm with that and offer the support. And we're trying to turn that on its head, as opposed to waiting for a referral to come in and do that high level engagement at the start and to learn what that means to us. So yeah, so where children and families aren't consenting, it doesn't mean that they're not involved with other services. It's just they don't feel that that's right for them at this time.
Yep, I mean, that's pretty good. 96% engagement is pretty impressive.
We're really proud of that.
It is. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Mr. Poland.
Thank you. I think my question follows very much on from what Tom's just asked, actually, and that was around working with families, which is obviously a key part of this work. Do parents generally engage positively with it? Is this something that sort of parents on the whole welcome, or do you face sort of resistance from parents who don't see that there's a particular problem and don't see potentially the impact that their kids are having on the wider community? And I guess as a follow-on from that, where that is the case, where the parents don't want to particularly engage with yourselves, is there any evidence there to show that the outcomes for those children are worse in terms of criminal justice system than would otherwise be the case? So those are the two questions that I had. But I do have a question, a third one, as a result of the answer to Tom, and that's, you mentioned too many agencies potentially working with them, and I can completely get what you mean by that. Again, in my day job working as a caseworker, we quite often see families where sort of they will have the best will in the world and maybe not the best organisers, and they find that difficult. And I can certainly imagine if you suddenly got the government and here to help, and you've got 3-4 different agencies, that could get overwhelming, confusing, and potentially even conflicting in some circumstances. In those circumstances, do you have a single point of contact from any one agency to help that family, so they only have to deal with one person who can then go on and deal with everyone else?
Thank you. So I guess in terms of parents' engagement within youth justice children, it's really varied. You probably wouldn't be surprised that would be my answer. And we've got a larger proportion of parents, although I couldn't give you the data at the moment. We've got a larger proportion of parents that are really invested in their children and do want to do the right things and really want to work with us. We are currently trialling one of our workers being a family worker to help families understand what happens when their children are going into prison, what that release looks like. All of the criminal justice language that we use translated in so that parents can look at safety planning with us and how that unfolds. So the larger proportion we generally know that we'll know the families that aren't that invested because they've probably had a number of years of intervention from us as a county council. It becomes really much more complex, and that's where we'll wrap different support around. So we will try really hard to engage with children because we've got a statutory responsibility to do that, and their parents, and we'll look at perhaps some of the tasks that parents might need help with, so that we're branching that support out so it encourages them to engage with us. So it's an interesting landscape, but I would say on the whole more parents engage with us than not. And we also, then when you've got that relationship, they're more willing to be open and transparent about what support they need as parents as well. So we have access to triple P parenting programs, which are all evidence-based. We can get, and because we're all sat in the same service area, we can get family workers in there. For example, if we know there's a new baby coming, we can look at pathways for that child and break down some of those potentials that we know might happen later. So it's kind of a very creative response. But again, when someone doesn't consent, it doesn't mean that that's the end of the road for us. It will still continue to try in different ways, or we'll get the agency that's got that good relationship with them to continue that conversation and hopefully break down some of those barriers that are preventing them from engaging. And then in terms of having a single point of contact, we do work in that model. We would have partnership meetings where everyone's around the table and contributing, but the plans then would identify the worker that's best to deliver that piece of work. So we know that actually it might not be one of our youth justice officers, but it might be the youth worker that's been working with that family for a long period of time, or that family worker. So it's about working with children in youth justice, and youth work is about that trusted adult relationship. So we really, and that's part of the child first approach as well, isn't bringing new people in, but working out who's best, who's going to have the most impact at delivering that message and moving that child and family to where we need to and the support that they need. And so we'll work out who that trusted relationship is, but it might be a teacher in the school, it might not actually be any of our workers, it might be a youth work. We've done it before where it's been a rugby coach, and they've been the person that's been, you know, the person that that child has listened to. It might be one of our social care colleagues. So it's really just unpicking and taking a okay.
Does any other member of the committee have any other questions? Mrs.
Sorry, Chair. It was just in response to a question from Simon. You talked about the private children's homes. What influence or what conversations do we have with our district councils about whether or not another HMO that houses young people is okay in a particular area? What work goes in the background? Because certainly there seems to be quite a number of them in my division, and I didn't know whether or not there was a strategic view on what was a saturation point for high levels of HMOs, knowing that they're generally not great. I mean, the ones in my division haven't been fantastically managed, and they create a lot of antisocial behaviour and a lot of additional support work has to go in. So do we do any work with the district councils too? Because obviously they're the ones that agree the licences, agree the HMOs, etc., etc. What work do we do there?
We do work with our district councils as part of our commissioning team if we're informed that a home is being purchased. One of the added complications with this is that there is no responsibility to actually notify children's services by a private provider that they're opening an establishment in our area. So if questions, if information arises and there is contact, we can be part of some level of discussion, but there isn't a need or a requirement for them to notify us. So that is an added complication, and there are really strict limitations on what we could actually do to prevent somebody purchasing. The key thing, and it was alluded to earlier about the concerns, especially for what we would call 16 plus accommodation, is the push and the change to legislation that those providers will have to be registered going forward, and there is work underway from Ofsted. So to be fair, that is the vehicle and the route that will actually improve and increase the standards that those operators, providers work to. We do have contact with private providers. well, one, we would have contact if we were commissioning any of them for our own children. And that commissioning includes quality assurance visits as well as the visits from the child's workers. And we do work with them around child criminal exploitation. So we reach out to those providers to be part of that work, information, pulling them into what is available locally to support young people who are placed there. But in relation to planning requirements, that is not, there are strict limitations on what we can do, but the changes to the legislation that will come in and requirements about registration is probably the best way that they will be regulated.
Does any other member of the committee have any other questions, comments? No. Sharon, Carly, Mrs. Taylor, do you have any other comments you want to add? So just to say a huge thank you to everyone for the questions today and to everyone for answering the questions in such detail and very helpful items. So thank you very much for coming today and answering questions. Thank you. So our next item, item 9, is the Corporate Ways of Working Programme update. The report starts at page 75 of your pack. Gordon McFarlane, the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, will introduce the report, and he is supported by David Scott, Change Lead within the Transformation Unit, and John Liddell, Assistant Manager in Strategic Property Services. Mr. Bedford, Lead Member for Recovery and Transformation, is also attending for this item. So welcome everyone. And Gordon, when you're ready, please introduce the report.
Okay, thank you. I think the simplest way perhaps is to take you through the main points of the report. We've produced an action plan. Well, the action plan was originally came out of the Task and Finish group that met well over a year ago, and what we've done is added a column to that to show progress that's been made, items that have been finished or absorbed into the programme as kind of business as usual. So the action plan is in some ways there for background information, but if I take you through the report and then you can refer to the action plan as necessary, but hopefully most is covered by the report. I think that it's probably just worth saying at the beginning that the context of this is, you know, we're running in parallel with lots and lots of other organisations in terms of a different model of working, moving to hybrid working, using technology, using our property differently, thinking about culture and people, and meshing that in as a single programme, and that I don't know of any organisation, certainly public sector organisation, that is looking to return to that traditional 5 days a week, you know, in the office. So I think we're beyond that, and this is very much about how we now implementing this and embedding it and making it effective. So I've mentioned the Task and Finish group, and a bit of background, which we've talked about before in this meeting, around where we were pre-COVID, what COVID did in terms of refocusing us very, very quickly, and then giving us that opportunity to relook at the business case, revise it, refresh it, and think about what did we learn through COVID, but what still needed to be done, you know, moving into the longer term to make the impact of the programme and the changes fully sustainable, long term and effective. And certainly bottom of the first page in paragraph 5, put a little bit in it, but we'll come to financial benefits later, but a little bit around some of the non-financial and more indirect benefits which we should see and we will track, such as lower sickness absence, better recruitment and retention, greater staff well-being, positive impact on our carbon footprint, etc. But as you've heard in the last report, there are lots of other impacts on services. So, you know, youth justice struggling with recruiting and retaining, nothing to do with ways of working. So again, and is pretty much embedded. We'll come to some of the detail on that later. And we're now well underway and almost complete with the work on room 600 for children, schools, families, colleagues. And that is the first time that those colleagues will have been in the same area of the business together. And there are lots of benefits to be gained from that. I think, as I said, 3 strands to the programme. A key one is the amount of organisational development activity that we put with this programme, that we take managers and staff through a kind of, that's the change curve, I suppose, but that we don't just say, here's a new way of working, switch that on. We think about culture, we think about different management styles, skills that are needed, and we take people through that journey. The next sections 8 to 9 show some of the investment and predicted savings, and we've taken that over a period of 9 years rather than 4 years of the MTFS. We've obviously got that as well, but we're kind of tracking some of the property changes and property reductions and savings, as well as long-term savings in business mileage as well. So again, not going to that at this point, but you can see the figures in terms of investment over 9 years and likely returns over that same period, which are significant. I've mentioned in the next section around the appendix, the action plan, and for those members that were able to attend, we did have an all-member briefing in November last year, where we did a tour of 700 and talked about some of the aspects of the programme, and that hopefully helped to bring to life what we've been doing. In terms of property, and again, this is in common with lots of other organisations, when we are using less space, it unlocks the potential to either divest ourselves of some property and reduce our costs, and or leasing some of our property out, and we've done both. So it's very much a rationalisation of the estate, and you can see some under the bullet points some of the actions that we've been taking, and again we can come back to that in some more detail later. And some of the benefits there as well around the new office model. Thought it would be helpful, because I think there's been some perceptions about the use of the County Hall campus, just to put a section in there around the usage of the campus. So we've got much more accurate data around the numbers of people that are using the building on a daily, weekly, and then we can take some average, monthly basis. And what that's showing is as we roll out the revised workspaces and we have people starting to use those in an intelligent way and for collaboration and all the good business reasons that people are using our buildings for, as well as an increase in tenants, some of whom are also using a collaborative space in their own areas and investing in that you can see that the numbers have risen. Now, we do have some patterns. We have a gradual increase in over the months, and we've taken that sort of number of months over just over a year, and you can see a broad increase in the number of people using the campus, and that will continue as we roll out. We're just about finished. Children's will be starting on other parts of the campus, and then you can see the pattern over a week. And although there may be some questions around why Mondays and Fridays are lower, all I'd say is that is no different to any other organisation that we're aware of. But this is very much about every service looking at their business need, looking at where, when, and how people need to work, and really making sure that actually the customer demand and the business need is served first. But as I say, no different to any other organisation that we're aware of in terms of patterns. There's some, again, can perhaps go into some detail on this, but what we've tried to do is give you some information around the pilot by both those departments, adults and communities, environment and transport, of room 700, the changes that we made, and then some feedback from leadership teams in terms of their take on what the differences have been, what they've seen, what the benefits have been of moving from a traditional way of working, and then not just to some form of hybrid working, just using desks in a traditional way, but then the office layouts that we've set up with lots of opportunities for different ways of collaborative working, how that is really benefiting the business. And again, I keep stressing that the business benefits, there are individual benefits as well, of course there are, but let's look at business benefit first, and that's absolutely key. So again, when you go into a bit of detail, we also did a survey of staff who were part of the pilot, and you can see what the key under paragraph 21, what the key headlines from the survey were. And okay, this is individual bits of feedback from those individuals and their own perceptions, but you can see work-life balance and well-being, 58% of people said there was a positive increase in this current economic climate, thinking about recruitment and retention, and having suitably qualified and experienced staff to deliver services. That's really important. Again, bring the business benefit back in. And then productivity, 44% of people felt that their productivity had increased, which again is a really strong message. Only 7% reported negative impact. And actually, take that 7%, you can then do something about that. You can sit down with people and do something about the way that they're working and see how you can address that. And then some detail around some of the specific aspects of the office space in which we're being best used and which are most useful, so we can make adjustments as we go on. So again, next phase I've mentioned. So from an internal perspective, children and family services into 600, and again, colleagues in the programme have worked very closely with the children and families management team around the way the department works, what's important for that department, and therefore what the space looks like. And you can see, I'll just give an example there, wellbeing rooms. So the department have a vision of providing real proper support to staff who have exposure to traumatic situations, they have exposure to trauma as part of their day jobs. How do they then come back to an environment with their colleagues and get the right support? So setting up wellbeing rooms is just an example of something that is needed and welcomed in children's that may not be needed in some other of our departments, or less of a need anyway. So I think we then move on to focus in other rooms, and that includes once we're able to safely give up space, we can then look to rent out. So you see that if people are settled in 600, we can then look at possible rental of 500, and negotiations I think are underway now around room 500. But it's important that we make sure that we have the right configured and sufficient space for our staff before we release more space for rental. So an important part of the business plan is rental income, but not at the expense of the space that we need in, say, a county council building. And you can see that will then move to other departments as well. And just on external rental, we've talked about this before, but we're now at a figure of over £1 million, and that is likely to increase in conversations, again, commercial conversations ongoing, to 1.8 million a year. And that's part of the expectation that's built into the medium-term financial strategy. So a very positive picture around how we are wisely using the space that we don't need, using it as in isn't leasing it out, so that the building is optimized. And then in terms of the wider estate, exiting from buildings that are surplus to requirements. So 2 examples there where we've saved over 300,000 a year in revenue costs. We're also implementing that revised office model and desk setup at a wider locality sites that we're still using, including depots as well. So this is not County Hall centric and County Hall focused. Actually, this is about people who use any of our workspaces, to put it like that, and that is going down very well as well. And then you can see that we'll have ongoing review of space requirements in the future. So we're not just setting this up and saying that's what we need now and that's it. This needs to be dynamic and kept alive. So if I move on to just talk briefly about productivity, because it's a question that's come up a number of times over the last couple of years around perhaps the perception that if staff are working remotely, they as individuals, these can be sweeping statements, I know, but they as individuals or the whole service as a result, or even the organisation, is not as productive. And we've had then, and I think that's I'll call it an urban myth, and I'm not sure there's evidence of it. In fact, in some ways, it can go the opposite way. But what we have done is we've launched a piece of work to get managers to look at what they already measure, because as you know, key performance indicators, etc., feeding into performance reports. So you go from your individual, one-to-one conversations through supervision to team meetings to annual appraisals to service plans, and then ultimately, as members will see, there's an organisational wide performance compendium that you get from data and business intelligence colleagues. So we have a plethora of data and information that's available. How do we pull out what best measures productivity? So that's the challenge to our managers and our service heads, to not reinvent the wheel where possible, but to look at the data that's already there and say, is it really measuring productivity, or which elements of it will measure productivity? And we know that's easier in some areas. If we make widgets, you can measure productivity. If the customer service centre is answering calls, you're not looking at quality, but you're looking at the number of calls answered and the time taken, etc. Quality is a different type of measure. If you're working with a policy officer who's working on a long-term piece of work, it's a different conversation around measuring productivity. And a big part of this is about, and this is the manager and the employee support, is how do we measure outcomes? So how do we look at what outcomes and outputs we're looking for, rather than I'm sitting at a desk 9 to 5, so that might be my input. So it's really looking at what we're producing, if you like, against our targets and measures. But colleagues have put in the report what I think is a really helpful example in terms of paragraph 32. And again, there's a lot of detail there. There's some stats, but it's a kind of mixed team, if you like. So some direct street lighting repairs. There's also engagement with parishes. There's clerks meetings, and then there's some individual feedback from people as to how a different way of working is benefiting not just them but the service as well. In a range of ways that if you go back to the business case and start to tick through the benefits, you see there's a number of benefits that are being achieved. So that's the type of thing that we're kind of looking for. And those are the types of things that service would be measuring anyway. Now you can have a debate about whether this is whether it's all productivity, but I think it's a good example of what we're trying to achieve. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions, and I'm sure colleagues are equally happy.
Okay. All right, before we start, Mr. Bedford, did you want to say anything?
No, I think that was a really good overview. I suspect there's quite a few questions to come from the colleagues, so I'll hand over to colleagues to ask them.
And thank you, Gordon, for a detailed introduction there. Mr. Morgan first.
Thank you very much, Gordon. In square meters, how much floor space does County Council need to operate?
I haven't got that figure, but I don't know, John, if there's anything we can say around what we're working towards and how accurate we could be in the future.
Yes, I mean, it's evolving element which revolves on obviously services as they evolve and their target operating models are changing. But on the original business case, the authority needed between 5,000 and 7,500 square meters approximately at that time. And we're continuing to work with services as that evolves, because some services obviously are changing their target operating, they're evolving as the whole process proceeds. But within that's where we are. and it's difficult to be more precise than that at this stage, because obviously as we move the pieces around, as people vacate certain areas, those boxes don't exactly fit other tenant requirements. So I could take some more details outside of this, but that I would say that is the guide.
Can I just ask a supplementary? So my background is an architect. So you're saying for the whole of the county council, including things like the rooms that we're sitting in, the target is between 5,000 square meters and 7,500 square meters.
7,500 square meters is for the office accommodation.
Okay, but for the whole of the county council to operate?
Yes. On this campus, sorry, yes, as long as on this campus, yes.
So my approach when I work with companies and organizations is that they go through an exercise of working through what their business needs are, and they then calculate the space they require. And then part of the theoretical exercise of working out whether their existing premises are to the job, or whether they need to co-locate, or whether they need to relocate, then to be able to actually go through an exercise of valuing their current sites, putting that into the mix, other alternatives that they might own, or maybe they need to purchase, etc., is part of the original strategy that you work out as to, before you actually do anything else, as to whether the options available mean that actually option A of building a brand new headquarters elsewhere on a piece of site is actually the most cost effective for running costs, but also the most valuable release of assets, etc. Have we actually done that? Because if we don't actually know how much square meters we need as an organisation to operate, I'm not entirely sure where we're starting from in that case.
Yes, all of that work is complete, and that work was completed as part of the original to inform that original business case, and then has been revised as that business case has progressed.
So we do have a document somewhere that says how many square meters of floor space we need as an organisation to operate.
As I said, within the business case, there is a figure. That figure, it continues to evolve as services evolve. Children and family services have moved, and I think that whole information has changed.
I can't get into the technical property bit for obvious reasons, but it's not my background. But I suppose if we started from the premise that if we look at this campus, County Council needed or continues to need a headquarters, let's put it that way. We know that we need less space than we did, and the way we've done it is service by service, department by department. So there's a broad brush, as John said, footprint, but some flex within that, because, so for example, as we piloted 700, were we giving them too much space? Did they need more space? And until you start working a certain way, you're not absolutely 100% sure, how best you're using that space, and it's a different way of working. So we needed to bed that down, tick that off, and as we've now established, it's the right space. The same process in room 600. You're bringing diverse professional teams together for the first time, using the space differently. Is it the right space? Do we need to flex it slightly? Do we need to retain room 500 as a bit of overspill until it settles? Get to the point of saying 500 can be released. Do we need to use that as an organisation? No. Let's negotiate with a potential tenant. Can we now lease that out? So it's I'm not fully answering your question. I absolutely understand that, but I'm just trying to get back to that's the approach we've taken, so that we're not going to have wasted space in the campus.
So my only comment on that, 7,500 square meters is tiny. If that's the figure, you could fit it on half a football pitch, which suggests that this campus is by a magnitude of probably 10 too big. So it comes back to actually understanding how much square meters do we need as an organisation to operate, because the question then is, this campus is completely redundant, rather than actually we're just going to renovate bits of it as we go along. So that initial figure is really quite important to actually understand.
I wonder if what we do is we go back to our plans and re-look at the space that we are using now, that we believe we'll be using in the future, because we can calculate that floor by floor, building by building on the campus, if you like, and perhaps we come back offline. So we deal with that outside the meeting and then come back and sort of either validate the figures or, you know, have a separate conversation. That's okay.
Yep, we can do that. That would be good. Thank you. Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just going to talk. I mean, it's a comment I think I made when this has been discussed in a year ago, whenever it was. But I agree. I think that flexible working is the future. I don't think that it be probably possible, but certainly I don't think desirable to going back to having a traditional 5 days in the office sort of situation. You know, I look at my own case. As it happens, myself and my wife both are in jobs that require us to work 5 days a week at an office. My youngest son is in childcare. For 2 days a week, it costs my wife £500 a month. Every month. That's more than on mortgage for 2 days every month, right? So if she could work from home, that would be an immediate £500 a month pay increase in effect. Okay, you know, you've got the cost of fuel on top of that. And the ability to work when under the weather is important. Now, again, I come back to the point that I'm in a job where I have to go into the work. If I'm feeling under the weather, do I drag myself in feeling cold, potentially affect other people, when actually I could just get my computer out and work a meter from where my bed. I just think this is the future. And that's good for me as an individual, but I think it would be good for the organisation as a whole as well, because ultimately that makes me happier and more likely to stay in the job, and I would suggest more productive. But one additional benefit that flexibility and working sort of online gives us is access to quality staff. Of course, if you're not having a situation where you have to be within commuting distance necessarily of here, you could have someone that's an expert in their field who lives in, I don't know, Cornwall or somewhere, right? And they don't have to come in very often. Then that increases the ability of us as an organisation to get access to those sorts of staff. So, whilst nowhere near as technical as Councillor Morgan's question, I think I just wanted to put, for me, I think that is the future. And I think trying to hark back, I think if we try and bring people in for the hell of it, there will be some jobs where that is required. There'll be some jobs where 9 to 5 is required, customer facing and so forth. But where we have the ability to be flexible, and it either doesn't take away from productivity or enhances productivity, for me, this is the future, and as I say, is something of a no-brainer. More of a comment than a question.
Yeah, if I come in on that, I mean, I agree, James. I mean, you know, outside of my my work here on the county council, I work in the utility sector. You know, I spend probably 3 or 4 days in an office and 1 or 2 days working at home. And I certainly use 1 day a week to have a quiet space to write reports where I can just focus, sit down, no distractions, get the reports done that I need to do. So I certainly recognise the benefits of having that hybrid model. But I think, as Gordon mentioned, and it's in the report, you know, the real focus of this programme isn't necessarily around you know, creating that hybrid working. That's a consequence of COVID, a consequence of the project in terms of the MTFS focus overall. But there are benefits to working in person in the office. You know, certainly for new recruits that come into an organisation, for training and development, for team meetings, for all of those collaboration, innovation pieces where being in person really does help, and it actually trumps virtual meetings. So I think there's a kind of a space for both, and I think that it's striking that balance that is right. And certainly, you know, Gordon alluded to it earlier, I would expect, you know, the management of teams in the various departments to be such that managers kind of work with their teams to ensure that they are adopting the most efficient model for their respective teams. So if that requires people to be in more often than not, then that's what we do. We do it as an objective, not as a fact that, you know, we're working at home more than not working at home. So yeah, I take on board your comments, James, and I agree. It's certainly the future.
Just a couple of really brief comments. I think in terms of sickness absence, you're absolutely right. In the right circumstances, without managers forcing people to work, because when they're sick, they're sick. But if they're able to work, safely, as opposed to coming in and perhaps infecting other people in the office, absolutely right. So it's finding that right balance. And in terms of staff and widening our pool, again, in the right circumstances, because, the person applying from Cornwall, we may be saying to them, we still want you to come in, need you to come in for a business reason. I don't know, make it up once a fortnight, for example. Is that doable? But it absolutely expands our pool. And we do have some examples of, we've had a couple of people join, I think it was the customer service centre from either Derbyshire or Derby City, because they could work effectively for us without having to relocate. And in their previous authority, they were expected to go into the office every day, in a very kind of unchanged way for that service. So greater flexibility, we get the benefit of their skills and experience, and you can see this happening, these trade-offs happening up and down the country.
Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to some of the answers you've already given, I think it would have been extremely useful for this committee to have seen the original business case alongside this report, and I don't know if that's available for us to see. But I would have thought by now that business case would have evolved into a strategy and a detailed action plan. I appreciate this action plan next to the ways of working scrutiny recommendation, but I don't see that as a detailed action plan for the whole of this process, because it's got no dates, it's got no timeline or anything of that nature. So that would have been useful. In response to some of the things you've already covered, clearly there are figures shown there for staff coming into, for people coming into the building. I would have expected to see a graph there on our staff, not just all users of the building, including those we're renting it to, because I'm predominantly concerned with how we're working as a council, not how other people are working as a council. So that would have been useful. What further work have you done on the new workspaces? Because if 56% of the staff are saying that in their own opinion, they see no discernible increase in their productivity on their own cognition, they're clearly not working, because it's not working for a majority of people in there. So do we not need to do something about that? And what is the model against what the manager's perception of their productivity is versus their own? So it would have been nice to see an overlay from our management against what the staff perception of their productivity increases on that basis. In terms of what you mentioned about renting out the campus, I mean, clearly a policy decision has been made somewhere by someone, I don't know who, that if we have spare space, it will be rented out. But in my role as chairman of Adults Communities, it's long been the ideal that we get our collections hub here and our records hub here. Now, if we rented the space out and therefore taken that space away, we can't do that. And that would give us, I would have thought, a better return, because if we can clear the office in Wigston, which we know is not fit for purpose anymore, clearly there could be a large capital return there or something else. Clearly we can get rid of the building in Barrow on Soar as well. So again, under what terms have we let those spaces? So do we have the flexibility to terminate those contracts within 2 or 3 months? Because we might need the space. I just wonder how we've come to the decision that we will rent out that space when it could be utilised for other things, and should that not be part of an overall strategy that we haven't yet seen or don't have designed? And the one thing I find a little bit strange about this, nowhere hardly in this report or in the ways of working scrutiny does it actually mention our customers. Now, as part of this, I would have thought we would have been looking at extended working hours, which again will reduce the floor print we need. And I came from an organisation where actually extended working hours actually was massively popular with the staff, particularly married couples, etc., who could then do childcare at different ends of the day and those sort of things. And for a lot of our staff, for a lot of our customers, the ability perhaps to ring here between 7 and 9 in the morning or between 6 and 8 at night might actually be beneficial and may actually suit those staff as well. And I don't see that as part of what I see here of this strategy. So I'm just concerned it's a bit ad hoc and we're not getting the best benefit out of it. I recognise all the real good reasons we're doing this, particularly in terms of well-being for staff, etc., all those natures, which I think we all want and we all applaud. I just wonder if we're missing an opportunity by not having that detailed enough basis on which we're making decisions on. And I'm slightly concerned about where those decisions are being made and how they're going to be scrutinised, because we're covering several portfolio silos here, which I think would be best put together in an overall composite strategy, which could then actually be discussed in a forum like this, so that we can, because we're not here to criticise. What we're here to do is to get the best we can for the organisation, for our staff and for our customers. And the more information we can base those recommendations on, the better I think it is for all of us.
There's a lot in there. Shall I try and pick those up and perhaps ask my colleagues at various points to just chip in if that's okay. I think in terms of the business case, yes, it was a revised business case. It's been through various processes and been agreed. This report, of course, is based on the specific work that the Task and Finish group wanted us to look at, and the action plan that we created out of the Task and Finish group. And I believe, although it's about 14 months ago, the Task and Finish group looked at the business case at the time. We included that as part of the paperwork so they could look at the detail. So we then lift that back out to the level we've got to. In terms of evolving into a strategy, I think, again, yes, perhaps we have missed a point in this report, because we focused on the outcomes of the Task and Finish group, the action plan, and then tried to paint a picture of how we've evolved the programme into implementation. And I suppose that links to the point around the collections hub and records. We're obviously aware of the work that's going on in adults and communities around that. And there are links between this programme and that work. I think, David, you're on the collections hub board or whatever the meeting is. So we're not merrily going along leasing out space that actually may be needed for something like the collections hub in a separate decision, at some point in the future. So it would not be about cancelling some of the leases that we've got. Is very much about acknowledging that from a ways of working programme, we're looking at elements of the camp. Know that the work in adults and communities, looking at the collections hub, working up a separate business case, working up the finances, that will go through a separate decision-making process, but we're aware of it from a programme point of view. Jumping around a little bit, I'll come back to previous points. I think the customer one is an interesting one. I think the customer, I was at pains when I did the introduction to talk about business need. From that, I really mean business as in serving our customers. That's what comes first. I think it's implicit in here, but may not be as explicit as perhaps you were expecting. I think the extended working hours, I'd see that as, okay, you can link it to ways of working, but it's not core ways of working. It's business as usual. From an HR perspective, I want to work with a service who say the nature of a customer expectation has changed. It needs to be, 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. or whatever. Okay, let's have a conversation about contracts of employment and make changes on that basis. Never mind where people are working from. It's a Venn diagram, isn't it? We can bring that in and look at it as part of ways of working, but it's kind of core business for that service. And I think the workspace, the work we've done on workspaces in terms of productivity, I think what we're very conscious that we're giving you was something on the personal perceptions of people who were in the pilot, but then in a separate bit of the paper, also a tangible example from a management as well as staff perspective about, the benefits that have been accrued from a different way of working for a particular service. I don't know, David, whether there's anything more you can say on that around productivity.
Yeah,
workspace.
I will cover. Is this on? Yeah. So I'll cover off probably 3 points. I think picking up on the productivity element of it. To Gordon's point, obviously that was a moment in time around colleagues that were part of the pilot. What we've done since then is listen to the feedback around what changes would be best required in order to make it even more productive. We haven't yet followed that up with a further series of obviously benchmarking, but we certainly will do that. I think it's really important to call out though that the departments in particular, so particularly adults and communities, quite a large proportion of those staff are already working in a fairly flexible way because they're out interacting with service users. So predominantly they wouldn't have seen a huge amount of impact from it, which definitely helps in terms of being able to obviously fit everyone into the campus, because it's primarily those that are based here. A lot of them had actually said they'd seen quite a significant improvement. As well as that, what's included in the reports, obviously it's not just about speaking to staff. We did get a view from the management team, which is included in the reports, and they're fairly happy overall. We've recently signed off the pilot to what we've referred to as business as usual, so I'm fairly happy with the work that's been done there. Now obviously we've moved on to children's. I think in terms of the second point around, I won't specifically by the collections hub, but I was a bit disappointed originally because we actually started those conversations, and the original thinking was with us having more space available, we could perhaps actually do something a bit different there. The actual layout and the physical makeup of this building doesn't lend itself to that, and therefore there's different conversations being had, but that was a discussion very early doors. And like Gordon said, I sit on the board for that particular piece of work, so those connections are made. I think the final one on the customer point, I completely agree with you. Customers are at the heart of everything we do. That's why we're here. One thread that's gone through all of our work, and maybe it's not as explicit in this report as perhaps it could have been. So everything we do is for the citizens of Leicestershire. The second we started this programme and started engaging all managers, you may remember, we discussed around the ways of working action plan process, as we called it. That's where, just a quick recap, apologies if I'm covering old ground. We asked every service to consider all of the key points, and this went everything from well-being to productivity, but primarily what do your customers need? What are your service needs? How do you see that adapting? How do your staff need to adapt in order to make that work? That process not only got launched quite heavily, we made sure every single manager did it, which was a huge success. We have refreshed that several times over the past few years, in particular with the pilot teams. So that's a huge part of the process we go through when we actually are engaging them in the design work. So we have a moment in time previously, which we'll base it on, but then as we go to them, we really work through all of those elements. A lot of them, of course, are for managers to consider, but what we backed that up with primarily to support them, and some of it's covered, I'd probably refer to page 87 of the report. You'll see what we refer to as the Smarter Working Wheel. So this doesn't do the whole thing justice, but this is primarily a tool that managers can use to basically really understand how is best for their service to operate. So it almost takes those ways working action plans, which is the what, and this is perhaps you could refer to this as the how. So it covers 6 kind of key areas that focus primarily on the individual. So what does the individual need to work in the most productive way possible? The role itself. So what does this job require? Knowledge, skills and behaviours is another aspect. The team, so what does the team need for team cohesion and communication? But then we've really got services and customers in there as a really key backbone of that. So you certainly wouldn't go, what do you want to do? I want to work at home 5 days a week. Well, actually your customers need you here, but we'll prioritise you. It has to factor all of it in primarily. So that's been a really key element of it, making sure that the customer part is at the heart of everything that we do, and certainly the leadership teams and managers of course have got that as one of their key driving forces. I think that's probably all I'd cover. That's helpful.
I'll just come back for a couple of points of clarification. So is what you're saying, I mean, the thought process I know from Cabinet as well as from Adults Community was the Eastern Annex would become the hub for collections and the records office, but clearly there are staff over there that wouldn't need to be relocated, presumably into this building. If we've rented out the floors in this building, we've got nowhere to put them, is the point I was making. Also, the problem that's holding it up is the capital funds to actually do the work, whereas if we were to sell off part of this campus as an argument for arguments, or be able to sell off the site in Wigston, it would possibly generate the revenue, the capital to do that work, but we made a policy decision by the sound of it that we're just renting out spare space rather than looking holistically at the whole campus and what is the best return to this council in terms of revenue savings, revenue income and or capital income, which slightly worries me because we're cutting off our options for the future if we don't look at this holistically. The point about how many of our staff are actually coming in wasn't covered as well in that chart. And in the productivity one, where you say it's quite a good example of productivity, I would possibly argue it probably isn't actually, because if you're going from 12.82 days to 18.93 to 7.75 to 10.3, I would argue someone needs to have a serious look at that service, because if you're getting fluctuations of that magnitude, there is something seriously wrong with how it's running. And I don't actually think it shows what you're saying for of a major productivity gain, because in actual fact, productivity's got worse in the last year, not better. Now, I appreciate if you compare it back to 2019 and you've got to look at the circumstances, it's better. But without understanding what the work involved in that area is, it's difficult to tell. So it doesn't strike me as a very strong example of a productivity gain. And also the point about what survey has been done of the managers to overview the staff perception of productivity. So we haven't got the manager's view of their staff and teams' productivity levels, which would give us that ability to compare one with the other.
Yeah, apologies, that was the bit I missed. There was the numbers. I think the system will allow us to break down the numbers into county council staff and tenants, so we can look at that. I just wanted to give a general message around increasing use of the building. I absolutely take the point around what we're worried about. Yeah, absolutely get that. I think in terms of the productivity example, it's one of those that I think if we had a representative from the service here to paint a bit more context and give us a bit more detail, it would provide a richer picture. So it absolutely recognise it's a snapshot. Yes, the figures vary. There will be other reasons that go outside ways of working for those variations, and we would need somebody to paint that picture, but point taken. And I don't know, John, whether you can comment around the, renting out versus capital, because it kind of...
Yeah, so just to reassure you that I think maybe we just need to take that element out. I've previously done a presentation on the County Hall campus strategy, and perhaps we could circulate those slides after this event again, which set out how that work would be done. And I can reassure you that the whole of the Eastern Annex and the collections hub is fully taken into account of that, plus all the staff that are currently in there would be relocated into the main building. That has been taken into account. I can provide some slides that are more specifically based that from a previous event. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Okay, Mrs. Page.
Thank you very much. And I've got here 2 pages of notes, and my previous councillors have taken care of most of my questions. But so I'd just like to focus on going back over some of this. This report starts off with process and progress, and the report doesn't actually reflect that very well, as Councillor Richardson picked up on. I would have liked to have seen a detailed action plan with timelines and dates so we can focus, because otherwise, if we have these things and verbally, we have a report here plus a verbal explanation, but that doesn't underpin the actual actions, because we did not know, obviously, that there is a separate decision-making process, task groups and panels. Now, what then is my thought? It is, how does it all link together? And really, the report should, for good scrutiny, show to us that all of this is linked and how the process works and comes together. I was going to raise the point of productivity in paragraph 32, but that's been taken care of, and the point of managers and the overlay. And again, it goes back to how do we link all of these things? We've got a department that deals with customers, customer service and customers. So how do you feed into that? How do you link with that? And surely there should have been a reflection in the report of that as well. And as Mr. Richardson mentions, we involve managers, and you say there is a great success, but how do we know that, and how do we make that sustainable? Because managers are constantly changing. So how is that reflected? Because this, I think it is, forgive me and forgive us all for harping on about these things, but I think it is the most important piece of work we have done, because this is going to define and shape the future going forward. And we need a concrete base to build upon, so then we can add the bricks to complete our house. Now, another thing was, Councillor Morgan raised, you know, the footprint and all of that. Well, in my simple terms, I thought that was also very important, because when I looked at the figures, we somewhere in there, I can't remember it, in the usage of the council building is increasing to 1,200. It's gone right up. So going back to Councillor Richardson's point, you know, how many are actually county? But if this is increasing, surely how do we take account of that we may need more space in the building in future? Because if people are coming back, and if they realise heating cost, or you know, their children are growing up or whatever, so if we sell everything off, we might not have that space to accommodate it. So how do we future-proof it? So hang on a minute, I'm almost there. Okay, on point 27, and there's actually a question. On point 27, we are talking about rental income and how positive it is. But my question is that rental income grows, or have we featured in all the maintenance costs and overheads? Because at the end of the day, as time goes on, we can't just focus on a rental income when their new chairs are needed, their cost from wear and tear, etc. And thank you for the report. And last point, I'm sure the progress report will be coming back within a year or something, or 6 months, will it? So we can look at, you know. So thank you.
I think most of those questions I shall pass over to Gordon, but just as a general point, yeah, my understanding of this report was, as of course it was an update since the Task and Finish Group reported last year. So I think a lot of the points that Rosita raises relate to maybe more broader than the update that we've provided here. So I think we can go away and provide that more comprehensive update on the.
I understand that this is a strategic report. However, it starts off process and progress. So even so, it is a strategic overview. It has to be underpinned by actual evidence of the process and progress. Otherwise, we can't scrutinise that, can we?
Yeah, and I think officers have taken on board the comments in terms of what they would like in future reports to ensure that you've got all the information that you would want. Just a comment from myself. I mean, if there are specifics, data points that you want ahead of this meeting, I mean, these reports circulated way ahead of the meeting, so you can contact me or contact the officers so that those data points, that piece of information, are available at this meeting. I know there was some specific ones about floor space and about use of the county hall campus. If we had those beforehand, we might be able to give a bit more comprehensive answers during the meeting. But I'll pass across to Gordon to
Thank you. Hospital pass. Yeah, no, it's fine. I think Mr. Bedford's right in terms of we're perhaps because we focused on what the task and finish group had asked us to look at, and we're kind of going back a little bit in history now, but then focusing on what we've done since then. And the attempt in the report was to try and move that into some evidence-based implementation. You know, we're now well into the implementation phase of the programme, and can start to demonstrate what impact that was having, as well as the consideration stage by stage. And just in terms of that stage by stage point, when we're talking about taking account of space needed, 2 points there. One is we're doing it floor by floor, department by department, and working closely with departments. So we've just worked with children's around what space they need, how they can optimally use that space. And we will see an increase in the number of children, families, staff who are using that space, and we're starting to see that. But I'd also go back to some original documentation that we had, which was service by service across the authority. We asked our service heads to go through the action plans that David talked about earlier, and you know, these need to be dynamic documents. They will change and evolve, but at a point in time, what were the approximate either percentages or numbers of people who would be using, you know, office space, and then we build our plans around that. So those are core, very detailed documents that we would go back to. I think I've flagged a risk either in this meeting or a different forum of the cost of living crisis at a point in time as we were moving into the winter. Kind of worried about people saying, well, I'll come into the office because that's warm and I'll save heating my own property. We've not seen that spike. I think what we've seen by the numbers are people using our office space for good business reasons and much more collaboration, rather than that sort of risk which we did flag. John, the rental income and what it includes, I think maintenance costs and overheads, etc. Do you want to?
Yeah. So the income that's referred to there is revenue flow. So that is rent and service charge inclusive. So it is the total income the authority receives. It can be placed against, as you said, repairs, sinking fund, maintenance, chairs, replacement furniture, etc., etc. Yes.
Sorry, just to come back around one more point I realised I missed. In terms of making success sustainable, which I thought is a really good way of putting it, of course we have turnover of managers and staff, but if we deal with our expectations, the cultural points, the different ways of working and managing in our recruitment documentation, in our induction, and in ongoing training and support, of which there's a lot, then we're able to kind of recruit and retain to this new model, if you like, maybe one way to put it.
Thank you. I do have a few bit of sympathies with the officers, because I think there's been quite a significant amount of scope creep in this conversation, because actually, if you look at the original report, it's quite clear what the plan was around ways of working for our colleagues. We've talked a lot about the campus, which wasn't part of the original proposal, but I think it's something as scrutineers we need to look at. My question is back looking at our people. And in the previous report, we had an impact assessment in terms of the impact on the strategy on people. What I don't see is what the impact assessment is on our colleagues. And the thing that I've had to do this piece of work in my own organisation, and we're a predominantly care organisation. So most people are actually having to not work from home, but the managers can. And there's in my view, there's a real complexity and fairness balance to strike, because lots of our staff that have to work in the communities are women, and lots of the management staff then are mixed between men and women. So have we looked at that more widely in terms of the impact on our wider population of workforce, those that have to work, that have the opportunity to work from home, and those that don't, and how that's fairly applied? But also looking at the use of our buildings. I mean, the fact that you know, we don't use them so much on a Mondays and Fridays is no surprise to anyone, because that's when we take annual leave. But also most flexible part-time colleagues won't work on Monday and a Friday. That's the way that works. But I suppose the importance of the campus and keeping some of our corporate services running needs people, and how do we encourage people to use the facilities that are there as well as balancing off their need to be at home.
I can start, and perhaps if I miss anything, David, you pick up. But in terms of the impact assessment, I think there's probably a couple of aspects to what you're saying. One is an equalities impact assessment, and we did an original one, and we have updated the equalities impact assessment because we're very conscious that in putting a new model in, you know, we need to try and deal with any inequity that creates. You know, whether that be around, you know, a colleague with a disability who needs a fixed desk or whatever. I think your point around wider groups, this is a tricky one, but it's not uncommon for, you know, local authorities delivering a range of what were office-based, I nearly said office-based, and frontline services, and there will be large groups of staff who don't get a direct benefit, it's probably the right word to use, from such a programme. And it can create the perception of a two-tier workforce, or certainly inequity. And I think we just have to be honest about that. We have people who are out, you know, on highways, home carers. They will always be frontline staff. There may be things that we can do around the edges, you know, and we talked about some of our locality offices and depots in terms of looking at the collaborative furniture for when people are using them. But it is not the same set of business and individual benefits that we get from looking at the people who are traditionally office-based. And then the second point around using facilities, for me, goes back to that action planning. And for as a manager, having people in the office where they are, having one-to-ones, having appraisals, team meetings, coming in from a well-being perspective, problem solving with colleagues, all that stuff that can be better done face-to-face. And when you get additional benefits from face-to-face, what I should have probably said first is, and where it's necessary to serve your customers and be face-to-face as well. And then there's the knock-on benefit that the facilities are being used. David, is there anything I've...
Yeah, just a couple of points to that one. I think one of the original risks that we had on the programme was how do we make sure we're being inclusive of everyone and not just those that are based at County Hall, which is it's a common perception. We always end up focusing here. So the programme, we made sure all communications went to all staff, all managers through managers briefings. We did also be very explicit in the communications around that and the different examples of worker styles. So it's alluded to on, I think it's page 83 of the report, where you've got those that have got a fixed location, and it draws some parallels with catering assistants, etc., reception staff. So we're very, very explicit that to certain degrees this will be it will impact people in very different ways. So that was very, very open and transparent from the get-go, and that was a recommendation from the task and finish group as well, which we're very happy we had covered off. One thing we have done quite extensively, and it's been really beneficial, so we've got various worker groups where so we've got the disabled workers group, the BAME workers group, LGBTQIA, and we've engaged them quite heavily as we've been moving through the programme. So we've done regular updates to them. They've given a number of really helpful points to build into our communication plan, but primarily the planning around the new office space, just any considerations that we have to make. So we've certainly built that in as well. So I was going to, thank you.
Of course, yeah, the reporting back on employees, employee welfare, and the issues you raised comes to the employment committee, which Gordon attends, and Councillor Brecken chair. So we do discuss this quarterly in terms of the impact on employees of the council.
Mr. Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions to ask, one on flexibility and one on market demand. On flexibility, it's been covered a little bit by Councillors Page and Richardson, so I won't dwell on it. But my comment would be that this kind of new way of working is new. And, we've got room 600 still in refurbishment, 700 has only really just been done. It doesn't look like the data that we have is particularly deep over who is coming in, what departments. And so we can only predict so far into the future. So my theory was within the plan, what flexibility is being input to allow for change. But I appreciate Councillor Page covered that slightly earlier on. My second question is on market demand, and it may not be within the scope of this report particularly, but it's been covered by the council, so I thought I'd mention it. I think all members, welcome income into the council. We are a fairly low funded council. Let's not get around that, so any income is good. However, my understanding is that a lot of the estate that we have will need significant financial input to upgrade it to a lettable standard or to be able to sell it off. I sit on another large public body in Leicestershire, and twice now they've had projects that they've had, and I won't name and shame, but they put in a lot of money to be able to offer it to the private sector and other public bodies. And actually a couple of years down the line, what we found is there's been no demand for it, and they've wound them down, and hundreds of thousands of pounds have been spent on that. So my question is, what is the market demand there? I suppose if we're looking at creating just generic office spaces where you can hot desk, then that is quite adaptable, isn't it? But what is the market demand from businesses and other public bodies in Leicestershire for what we're trying to create?
Right. So I think on the first point around flexibility, so I'd probably cover off 2 points, which I think are really important. So you're absolutely right. We're still very early doors. Despite, I know it feels like we've been working on this for a while, but the actual implementation part only really started occurring last year. What we built into probably two aspects. So one of them is the business case itself. So the business case was built on that moment in time snapshot where we got all services to work through their action plans. And that broadly came out around they needed about 40% office attendance versus 60% at home. That's what we built it up on, but we also made sure that we didn't build it right to the point where actually there was no wiggle room. So there's a bit of contingency built in there just either way, because we knew that it could swing either way. And it was very early doors when we did that work. We then do the same piece of work when we get to the actual design planning of the pilot. And this was quite prevalent in room 700. We suspected that there was a bit too much space there, but the services hadn't gone through that culture journey. So now that they have, we're fairly confident we've got enough space there that they can go and contract if needed, and that would still work. We also have space across the campus as well. So to John's earlier point, we're not renting out to every little corner. There will always be pockets of space across the campus as well as various touchdown points. So that's probably the main thing we've done around that flexibility. It is early doors. To the children's aspect of it, we are very much keeping a very close watch on that to understand how much space they are using. If there is any risk that they are going to overflow, etc., we will make sure that they've got the space they need for the future. So we haven't had the risk present itself yet, but I think obviously to previous points, I'm not sure where they were made, if we sold off or rented everything out right now without embedding that model and having a bit of wiggle room, we could run into hot water. So that's primarily how we've gone about the flexibility aspect. Are you okay to cover off the demand element of it?
Yeah, so we have 6 main partners operating from the site at the moment under various leases. They are in those areas where we had identified fairly early on as part of the business case that it was no requirement for the county council to need that space, and we did that as part of our modelling of which departments would move to where and how that, for want of a better Tetris game, works in terms of how we move the boxes around so that people can consolidate. The children's and family service move is a big one and a big change for us, because obviously they've come from a number of smaller parts of the authority of the building and now located all into 600, which obviously will bring some benefit for them, but releases a number of pockets that we can assemble together. In terms of your comment about that, it is generic space, it's generic office space. We're not tailoring any space to a particular organisation. It is space that we would utilise for our own purposes if we needed to. And so we are not, and also we are not investing in that space unless we have a tenant lined up in advance.
So if I could just come back, Chair, just curious, you say we've got 6 tenants within the building right now. What sort of contracts are we looking for in terms of the length of time? Are they, 6-month renewal contracts? Are they 5-year contracts?
They're 3 to 5 years.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, did you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a quick point on numbers, which is quite interesting. Rosita touched on the figures, and I had another look at them following her comment. And certainly it seems that possibly we might have topped out on numbers. Our February figure is actually one less than our November figure, so it may well be that 1,200 sort of movements per day, whether it's our staff or whether it's other people's staff, may end up being maybe roughly where we're going to end up at. Looking at that, the sort of increase seems to have leveled off even through winter. But it did lead me to think that actually the 7,500 square meter figure that you quoted on space is roughly 1,000 people times 7.5 square meters, which used to be the old sort of rule of thumb on trying to guesstimate on office space. So I wonder whether that 7,500 square meters, maybe that's where it's actually come from, is 1,000 people occupying the building on a daily basis. Which maybe if you added another couple of thousand square meters for this type of space, actually still quite a small building. But it'll be interesting to see how it's actually come about. Thank you. Just a comment rather than a question.
Right. Does any other member of the committee have any other questions, comments? No. Does anyone have anything to add? Yeah. No. Well, thank you very much for coming to present the report today and for dealing with lots of different questions and inquiries. It's appreciated. Thank you. Right, that moves us on to item 10, which is date of next meeting, which is due to take place on the 12th of June 2023 at 10 a.m. And I'm not advised of any urgent items, so thank you for your attendance today and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Joe, is this coming back?
I've discussed it coming back. I think I was going to suggest that if you do want that report stemmed from a request that was raised. So the report was focused on what the Commission previously asked for, but obviously the Commission have shown an entirely different interest when they've read it and asked questions today. So I think part of the problem is we need to be clear on what we're asking them to produce and focus the questions on that.
Yeah.
So perhaps
we mouth of it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And clearly there was an expectation that it would include stuff that wasn't requested initially. So I think if you wanted to come back and program it in for say 12 months and then perhaps bring Gordon and David to a commissioners meeting to say in advance what you wanted to include so that we're very clear on what we want, because it is such a fancy photograph.
But I tell you why. This is one of the most important items, like